You know the surface. Porsche makes the 911, the sports car that every other sports car is quietly measured against, the one driven by dentists and dreamers alike. But underneath that polished surface, the Porsche Iceberg goes down further than almost anyone realizes. 6 levels, from what every person on the street knows all the way down to things the company would rather you never connect to that crest on the bonnet. By the time we reach the bottom of this iceberg, you will not look at a Porsche the same way again. Let us start at the top. Level 1, the surface. Porsche is the German maker of the 911, founded in Stuttgart, where it still builds its sports cars today. The 911 has kept fundamentally the same silhouette. And now I'm as white means what Donna White, its engine hanging out behind the rear axle since 1963, making it one of the most recognizable and longest-running designs in all of motoring. The crest on the bonnet combines the rearing horse of Stuttgart with the antlers and stripes of the old kingdom of Württemberg, a piece of local heraldry turned into one of the most aspirational badges on Earth. The slogan, "There is no substitute," has done the rest, selling the idea of a car that is blisteringly fast yet usable enough to drive every single day. Most people also know the cliches. The gentle joke that every successful dentist eventually buys one. The pronunciation, because the name is 2 syllables, Porsche, not one, and almost nobody outside the faithful says it correctly on the first try. But here's the part that would horrify the purists. The cars that made Porsche a legend are not the cars that keep it alive. The Cayenne and the Macan, the SUVs the enthusiasts love to grumble about, are the runaway bestsellers that quietly fund the entire sports car business. And without them, the 911 as we know it might not exist at all. Porsche is also, by some measures, the most profitable car company in the world per vehicle sold, turning a bigger margin on each car than almost anyone else on Earth. Porsche has also quietly become a lifestyle empire far beyond the showroom. Butzi Porsche, the grandson of the founder and the man who shaped the timeless lines of the original 911, went on to build a second business called Porsche Design, licensing the family name onto watches, sunglasses, luggage, and gadgets sold around the world. And the engineering layout everyone now takes for granted is, by any rational measure, wrong. Hanging a heavy engine out behind the rear wheels is a configuration every rival abandoned decades ago as inherently unstable. Porsche simply refused to give it up, spending half a century engineering around the flaw until that stubborn rear-engined balance became the car's defining signature rather than its weakness. It is the automotive equivalent of turning a permanent handicap into a superpower through sheer obsessive refinement. It is, in a single design decision, the most Porsche thing the company has ever done. Level 2, enthusiast knowledge. Here the story gets more tangled because Porsche and Volkswagen have been intertwined from the very first day. Ferdinand Porsche, the founder, designed the original Volkswagen Beetle in the 1930s, and the very first car to wear the Porsche name, the 356 of 1948, was built on humble Beetle mechanicals in a small workshop in Gmuend, Austria. The company that became the ultimate symbol of premium performance began life building a sports car out of the people's car parts bin. Enthusiasts also know the quirks behind the legend. The 911 was very nearly called the 901, until Peugeot pointed out that it owned the rights to 3-digit names with a 0 in the middle, forcing the change. They know the racing pedigree that built the myth, the crushing dominance at Le Mans, where Porsche has won outright more times than any other manufacturer in history, the all-conquering 917, and the technological marvel of the 1980s 959. And they know the 911 itself was almost killed off in the 1970s, when Porsche's own management was convinced the front-engined 928 was the future and the rear-engined relic should die. The customers refused to allow it. The 911 outlived the very car built to replace it, and today the 928 is the footnote. There is also the quiet truth that Porsche was kept alive for years, not by glamour, but by cheaper, sensible machines. In the 1970s and 80s, a family of front-engined cars, the 924, the 944, and the 968, did the unglamorous work of paying the bills, and several of them shared parts and development with Volkswagen and Audi. The American market, meanwhile, was effectively created by one man, the importer Max Hoffman, who pushed Porsche to build stripped-out, affordable roadsters for sun-soaked California buyers, shaping the brand's image in its single most important market. The legend was built on the racetrack, but the lights were kept on by ordinary cars the purists now barely mention, and those same cars are why a whole generation of enthusiasts can still get into a real Porsche affordably today. Level 3, the rabbit hole. This is where most owners fall away, because the deeper you go, the stranger Porsche's reach becomes. Its engineering for hire division has put Porsche's fingerprints on an astonishing range of machines that have nothing to do with sports cars. It built a legendary high-performance Mercedes on its own production line, developed an engine for Harley-Davidson, and quietly helped rescue troubled economy cars from other manufacturers, sorting out the engineering that those companies could not finish themselves. The company that sells you a weekend toy has, behind the scenes, been an engineering consultancy to a huge slice of the industry. Then come the skeletons the faithful only whisper about. The 996, the first water-cooled 911, saved the company financially but was born in an era of ruthless cost-cutting, sharing its controversial fried egg headlights and much of its structure with the cheaper Boxster, and hiding the now infamous intermediate shaft bearing, the dreaded IMS, which could fail without warning and destroy the entire engine. Owners still pay specialists to preemptively replace it decades later. And there's the Carrera GT, the screaming V10 hypercar Porsche sold with no stability control and a viciously sharp racing clutch. A machine so demanding it earned a fearsome reputation as one of the most challenging cars ever handed to the public. The genius and the danger, as always with Porsche, living inside the very same machine. And for those who go deeper still, there is the cult of the Mezger engine. The toughest Porsche Flat Sixes, the ones in the turbo and the GT models, descend from a race-bred design that famously does not suffer the intermediate shaft flaw at all, which is exactly why collectors now hunt them down and pay a premium for the engines built to survive the racetrack. The 1980s 959, meanwhile, was so far ahead of its time with its computer-controlled four-wheel drive and twin turbochargers that Porsche is widely believed to have sold each one at a heavy loss simply to prove what it could do. Brilliance, sold below cost, has always been part of the company's strange arithmetic. That same instinct explains how Porsche can sell what is essentially one car, the 911, in dozens upon dozens of subtly different variants, each with its own badge and its own price, turning a single platform into one of the most profitable product lines in the entire industry. We are halfway down the iceberg, and from here the water gets a great deal colder and a great deal more interesting. If you have made it this far, you are clearly not a casual viewer, so stay with me because levels 4, 5, and 6 are where the Porsche story stops being a car company and becomes something else entirely. Level 4, Deep Knowledge. In 2008, tiny Porsche attempted one of the most audacious financial maneuvers in corporate history. Using a hidden web of stock options and derivatives, the sports car maker secretly built up control of Volkswagen, a company many times its size, then announced its intention to swallow the giant whole. The plan was so secret and so effective that when it was finally revealed, the investors who had bet against Volkswagen were caught in a catastrophic squeeze, scrambling to buy shares that barely existed on the open market, and for one surreal afternoon, Volkswagen briefly became, on paper, the single most valuable company in the entire world. Then it all collapsed. The global financial crisis struck. The enormous debt Porsche had taken on to engineer the takeover became crushing, and the hunter became the hunted. Volkswagen turned the tables and absorbed Porsche instead, folding the proud sports car maker into the very empire it had tried to conquer, and the architect of the whole scheme lost his job in the wreckage, walking away by some accounts with one of the largest payouts in German corporate history, even as the plan collapsed around him. Out of it emerged the structure that still rules today, with the Porsche and Piech family sitting atop the entire Volkswagen group through a holding company. Then, in 2022, Porsche was floated on the stock market in one of the largest public listings Europe had ever seen, a moment that valued the sports car maker among the most precious car companies on Earth, briefly rivaling the worth of the giant parent that owned it and made its controlling family staggeringly richer still. At the center of all this sits one of the most powerful dynasties in the industrial world. The grandson of Ferdinand Porsche, a brilliant and famously ruthless engineer who shared the family name through the Piech line, went on to run the entire Volkswagen Group for decades, shaping everything from humble hatchbacks to the cars that wear the crest. The family fortune, spread across the holding company that controls Volkswagen, runs into the tens of billions, making the Porsches and Piechs one of the richest families in all of Europe. The little sports car firm from Stuttgart is, in truth, the visible tip of a vast and tightly held industrial empire. If you found this interesting, feel free to check out my ebook in the description or scan the QR code on the right, and don't forget to subscribe. Level 5, the Dark Water. This is where the romance gives way to the cold business model. Like its rivals, Porsche leans hard on the word lifetime, telling owners the fluid in the PDK gearbox is filled for life. The owner hears forever. The internal meaning is the expected service life of the vehicle, a figure that conveniently lands around the point the warranty has expired, and the independent specialists who actually rebuild these gearboxes will tell you to change that fluid regardless of what the brochure implies. That single word does an enormous amount of quiet financial work, and none of it works in the owner's favor. Then there is the legendary options list, the part of Porsche ownership that has become a running joke across the entire car world. This is a company that will charge you the price of a small used car to paint the crest onto your wheel caps, to add a stripe of contrast stitching, or to mix a color from its paint-to-sample program, building a car that starts expensive and ends, once every box is ticked, somewhere else entirely. There is a long-running joke that the only no-cost option on a Porsche is the air in the tires, and like the best jokes it lands because it is so very nearly true. A loaded 911 leaving the factory costing half as much again as its starting price. Every extra a small and beautifully justified nudge towards a number the buyer never quite intended to reach. And Porsche did not escape the diesel emissions scandal that engulfed its parent group. Its diesel models, whose engines came from within the group, were pulled from sale completely. The company was hit with an enormous fine measured in the hundreds of millions, and a senior manager was swept up in the criminal fallout. The maker of the world's purest driving machines was, for a time, selling cars quietly rigged to cheat the very tests meant to keep the air clean. Like the rest of the industry, Porsche has also edged towards charging for things the car already physically contains, with certain connected services and convenience features now sitting behind ongoing subscriptions. The same quiet shift that has turned a sold car into a recurring revenue stream right across the sector. Depreciation tells its own brutal story too. While a carefully chosen 911 can hold firm and even rise, an early electric Taycan has been among the fastest falling luxury cars on the entire market, shedding well over half its value in just a few years as newer, cheaper, longer-range rivals arrived. The badge that promises permanence can, on exactly the wrong model, evaporate money faster than almost anything else you could park on a driveway. The older engines hide their own expensive secrets, too. Alongside the dreaded intermediate shaft bearing, the early water-cooled flat sixes can suffer from bore scoring, a scoring of the cylinder walls that can mean a rebuild costing as much as the car is worth, and which keeps a whole industry of specialists in business. There is also the matter of how Porsche sells its most desirable cars. To be offered a limited GT model, buyers are often expected to have bought lesser Porsches first and to prove their loyalty, and an unspoken rule warns that flipping such a car for quick profit can see you quietly blacklisted from the next one. It is a brilliant machine for turning devotion into recurring revenue, and the customers play along willingly. Level 6, the Abyss. To reach the very bottom of the Porsche story, you have to go back to its founder and into the darkest chapter of the 20th century. Ferdinand Porsche was not merely a contractor to the Third Reich, he was woven into it. He joined the Nazi Party and was made an honorary officer in the SS, and the original Volkswagen, the people's car he designed, was a flagship project of the regime itself, championed personally at the highest levels of the state. When war came, his works turned to military production, contributing designs and heavy armored vehicles to the German war machine, some of which carried his own name. That wartime production, like so much of German industry in that era, leaned heavily on forced labor, on prisoners and conscripted workers who had no choice but to be there, under conditions that were frequently brutal and sometimes deadly, on a scale that the gleaming, sunlit brand history does almost nothing to acknowledge. After the war, Ferdinand Porsche was arrested and held in France for around 20 months over his role. While his son and son-in-law worked to keep the company alive. The modern company has since engaged with this history through commissioned research and public acknowledgement, but the true depth of the founder's involvement is simply not something most buyers think about while admiring the crest. The family that took root in that era went on to become one of the wealthiest dynasties in all of Europe, and through the Volkswagen empire it quietly helps steer a colossal share of the global car industry to this very day. Ferdinand's designs during the war extended even to heavy armor, including a prototype tank that lost its contract but whose chassis was turned into a feared tank destroyer that carried his first name, and the vast Volkswagen plant that built so much of it was run by his son-in-law using that same forced labor. And then, at the very bottom, sits the number almost no buyer ever dares to calculate. The true cost of owning a Porsche across several years is rarely the figure on the window sticker. On the most desirable sports cars, a good example can hold its value remarkably well, but the depreciation on a Panamera, a Cayenne, or an early Taycan can quietly erase a fortune while you sleep, and that is before you account for the thousands you spent on options, which return almost nothing when you come to sell. Add servicing at specialist rates, tires and brakes that are anything but cheap, The ever-present risk of a major engine bill on the older cars, and insurance on a high-performance badge, and the real cost of a few years of ownership can creep towards the price of simply buying the car a second time. The monthly payment was never the cost of the car, it was only ever the deposit on it. And there is a final, quiet irony in that number, because the same family machine and financial empire that built all of this means a meaningful slice of whatever you spend flows upward into one of the most tightly held fortunes in Europe. The beautiful object on your driveway is the visible, polished surface of something far larger, far older, and far colder than a car. 6 levels. From the easy cliches about dentists at the surface, all the way down to a wartime ledger, a family dynasty that helps steer an empire, and a true cost of ownership most buyers never dare to total up. Porsche is, at the very same time, perhaps the greatest sports car company in history and one of the most ruthlessly profitable luxury businesses on the planet. Those two facts are not a contradiction. They are the same company, simply operating on different floors of the same building in Stuttgart. The cars are extraordinary. The engineering is genuine. The history is far heavier than the badge ever lets on, and every single owner is parked somewhere on this iceberg, usually at whatever comfortable level still lets them enjoy the drive without ever looking too far down. Most settle in the upper sunlit water, among the racing glory and the timeless shape, and never once peer into the cold below. But it is all there, every layer of it, quietly holding up the beautiful thing on the surface. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check the ebook in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.